Hey guys, Gong here. So there's been quite a bit of confusion over why this seemingly genocidal, warmongering mass murderer should be someone that we should just warm up to since he's still the Warchief of our new allied race, the Mag'har, in battle for Azeroth. When we last encountered him, he was directly responsible for the massacre of Shatara City, the invasion of our world Azeroth, and countless other immoral acts against the races of Draenor, or sometimes even against his very own orcish people. How could he possibly not be a wicked villain that we should just assassinate on the spot? To make matters worse, how is it even conceivable that the various main characters involved in WOD were so quick to forgive him towards the end of the expansion? Well, simply put, it was very badly explained in the game. So allow me to share with you some crucial points about the character that were mentioned in the short stories that will help you understand him better. And perhaps by the end, you might just change your mind about him being an unredeemable character after all. Number 1. He was lied to. To start off, Grom was not entirely responsible for declaring war on both the Draenei and Azeroth. Through playing the game, we know that he was somehow manipulated by Garrosh, but honestly, manipulate is a pretty light word to use considering the extent of how much Garrosh exploited his alternate universe father. So this is actually what went down. When Garrosh landed on Draenor, he was able to give Grom a glimpse into the future using a time-altering vision device provided by the bronze dragon Kairos. This was elaborated on in great detail in the novel Hellscream by Robert Brooks. Through this vision, Grom was able to see how Gul'dan was going to corrupt his entire race through the drinking of Manoroth's blood, leading to what we see in the WOD cinematic of him rejecting the drink. In addition, Grom was also able to see a vision of what would happen when they invaded Azeroth through the Dark Portal, and he saw the internment camps that had enslaved the Orcs following them losing the war. He was even able to catch a glimpse of Thrall as a young Orc within one of the prison camps. However, it was at this point that Garrosh would forcefully pull him out of the vision, abruptly ending the process. Grom would therefore never see that eventually he would free his people, Thrall would lead them to a glorious new dawn, and that he never actually needed to declare war on Azeroth. All he saw was that his people were to be enslaved, not once, but twice. Firstly by demonic blood, and then by these seemingly evil denizens of Azeroth, the humans. After emerging from the vision, Grom then asked Garrosh if the Draenei were also part of the equation. Garrosh would state that they were also the enemy, and while not in the way Gul'dan described, they were still very much the villains that the Orcs had always perceived them to be. To the Orcs, the Draenei had senselessly slaughtered and wiped out an entire clan, the Bladewind clan, in a tragic event known as the Bladewind Massacre. In a nutshell, this had occurred because Gul'dan had convinced the Bladewind that their hardships, including the spread of the Red Pox by Gul'dan himself, a horrendous disease initially created by the ogres, was to be blamed on the Draenei. The Bladewind would then organize raiding parties on the Draenei in retaliation, capturing Draenei and sacrificing them in horrific rituals to appease the elements. In a counter-attack, and upon entering the village and viewing the horrors committed on their kin, the Draenei would wipe out the entire Bladewind clan. Gul'dan would then convince his fellow brethren that the Draenei had attacked without rhyme or reason, killing men, women, and children alike. So to the Orcs, who had also witnessed the Draenei's magnificent power when they defended themselves against the ogres of the Gorian Empire, essentially crushing their entire invasion, the Draenei would be a mysterious party they never truly understood, but only wished them harm. A big threat that had to be removed sooner than later. So Grom was lied to multiple times. Through Garrosh, he was lied to through a very convincing vision of the future. Through Gul'dan, he was lied to about the Draenei. In the novel, it also heavily indicates that while the Warsong were a warlike and violent people, they had not engaged in war for a long time, and were merely involved in brawls, a modified version of the Mag'har with their own clanmates to sate their bloodlust. With this in mind, it is highly unlikely that Grom would have united the entire Horde on his own and declared war without a strong enough reason. Grom's actions were all premeditated on protecting his own people, and he naturally viewed offense as the best defense. He now knew the future, and so it was just logical that he should strike first to prevent it from happening. Now this links up nicely with the next point. Number 2. He was only trying to prevent his people from going into slavery. There is an iconic line that Grom says in the WOD cinematic that is difficult to truly appreciate without knowing the backstory that we just explored.
We will never be slaves!
This line is not actually directed only at Gul'dan, but also, like we previously mentioned, the humans of Azeroth and also the ogres of the Gorean Empire. The orcs had been slaves of the ogres since the very beginning of their existence, and even during the time of the invasion of Azeroth, hundreds of orc families were still serving as slaves to the ogres. Grom's wife, Golka, had been slain at the hands of ogres, and the memory of it haunted him day and night, in how he was not strong enough to prevent her death. In addition, Grom himself too had been captured by the ogres following the passing of Golka. He was beaten, humiliated, and strung up on a tree to wither and die. As further elaborated in the novel Code of Rule by Ryan Quinn, Grom was someone who refused for him or his kin to be seen as weak, and desired to be the strongest there was. One of the very first acts of the newly united Iron Horde would be to attack the Gorean Empire, freeing his people from slavery at long last. This is exactly what Grom meant by that line, "We will never be slaves." This is also further emphasized upon when he says yet another line at the ending of Archimonde's death.
Draenor is free!
Free from what, you may ask? The demonic corruption? Not so much, but more of the concept that Draenor is actually free from the enemies that would enslave them. The concept of slavery plagues Grom's and the Orcish people's existence. To them, the ogres, the Draenei, the humans, and the demons were all one and the same. They were all hostile parties waiting to crush and enslave their people. Grom would vow never to be enslaved again, and so with Garrosh's manipulation, the Iron Horde would construct the Dark Portal and wipe out the threat on Azeroth first. But now, the humans and Draenei are their allies. The ogres have been defeated, Gul'dan is gone, and the demons have been killed. The Mag'har Orcs are finally free. Speaking of allies, this segues nicely into our last point. Number 3. He realized that true strength comes from working together. At the end of the same cinematic, Geralt says a few things that are pretty telling.
If you ever need us, we will be here.
She uses the terms we and us to represent both the Mag'har Orcs and the Draenei, that they are now one cohesive unit, ready to answer the call should Khadgar ever need their aid again, and that they are ready to rebuild Draenor together. Visually, both in-game and in the cinematic, we see both Mag'har Orcs and Draenei soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, conducting the assault on Hellfire Citadel and cheering on the final victory. Through this, I believe that this is where Grom's final redemption arc comes in how he has finally learned the true meaning of the word strength. Strength does not come from being the strongest one at the top of the mountain, but from putting forth a united front together with the other races of Draenor. Strength does not come from selfish conquest, but in rebuilding their home of Draenor together as one. Through his experiences within the Iron Horde, he has seen firsthand that when united, they can achieve almost anything. Through fighting side by side with the Draenei, he has learned that they are not the hostile force that he misunderstood them to be, but a culture in which there is much his people can learn from. And through Garrosh's trickery, he has also learned that there are other forces out there in other worlds that are willing to help him and his people. Grom is perhaps no longer the warmongering maniac that WOD portrayed him to be. He is someone very much affected by the trauma of the death of his loved one, and then tricked into a path in which he only thought he was protecting his people. However, I'm not saying that these points absolve him of his crimes. It's undeniable that there were some pretty terrible things that he did. but it also helps put into perspective that he was not just some mindless warmongering brute that wanted blood. He did these for largely selfless reasons to ensure that his people would never be slaves again. And perhaps this is why he has been able to retain the title of Warchief for so long. Perhaps for once, in this very special timeline, there exists an Orc Warchief that is willing to follow the route of cooperation instead of war, to lean towards diplomacy rather than violence. This is of course all speculation just from me, and it is quite counterintuitive to the personality of Grom Hellscream that we know of. But all I'm saying is that there is something to be said of a Warchief in a warlike and violent culture who is able to hold on to his title for several decades without anyone challenging or defeating him in a Mag'har. Perhaps following the encounter with the Legion, he has learned from his mistakes and is actually doing a great job leading his people and Draenor as a whole into a prosperous new age. But in any case, we won't know this until Battle for Azeroth hits, and the story of our new allied race of Mag'har Orcs unfolds. If you enjoyed the video, remember to hit that subscribe button, as I'll always be doing more of these allied race videos as more info is announced. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Azeroth.